We're in a two-part series right now. Part one answers the question, are we likely to have a recession? If so, when? The second part, which we're working on today, is if we are going to go into a recession, which industry sectors are going to most likely be affected? And are there industry sectors that may not feel it at all? Welcome to the PioneerCast. I'm Dwayne Abels, founder and president of Pioneer IQ. We hope over the course of the next 15 minutes, we're able to give you some insights on how the markets are shifting and which industry sectors are likely to shift, hopefully in your favor. Our whole objective here is to help equip you with insights and tools so that you're better able to prepare your leaders to build and scale their teams, ultimately serving your clients and the communities that sincerely need you. This topic is way too big for Dwayne. Again, joining me is Keith Prather. Keith, thanks for joining us and helping us out here.
Always a pleasure to be here. Always enjoy it.
So, Keith, we've kind of started to get a little bit of reputation about being optimistic. And I think that fits us pretty well. The truth for anyone watching this really is that Keith and I like to debunk myth, because oftentimes there's a lot of myths that are pumped into the marketplace and into our industry by the media or by our industry as a whole, or even sometimes associations to drive fear into some sort of behavior. And you and I are both really passionate about uncovering the data, comparing the facts, and helping people make really good decisions specific to their business and how they're trying to grow it. We're gonna kind of put ourselves out on a limb today. I think it's safe to say, Keith, and talk specifically about some of these industry sectors that we believe could literally be, I don't want to say recession proof, but a little resistant to recession. So I'm really grateful that you're here and we're able to work through some of this for our clients.
Yeah, it's so funny because I've been called everything from like Dr. Doom to, the Angel of Death and the Grim Reaper, and I mean you name it. And so it's odd, when people kind of come out and start chastising a little bit and say, wow, you're way too optimistic, man. Things are going to heck in a handbasket, and we, like you said, we just like to stick to the data. So we're going to do our best. To try to take a look at those sectors that we think could be a little bit recession-proof based on the data, based on trends, based on things that we see, in those specific markets. So here's just a quick list of a few things that we're watching. Manufacturing is really interesting, and I know, Dwayne, you and I have been talking about this for several years. But the trade wars that started in China kind of made supply chain managers start to rethink what they were doing with the global supply chain. So they had their first wave of disruptions. And then right behind that were just a series of events that just continued to just hit them hard. We had events in Europe, then, we went into the pandemic, and coming out of the pandemic, we've had a little bit of a feast and famine situation with the global supply chain. We've got incredible demand for products, but, we've got things like microchip shortages, and we've got raw material shortages, and so supply chain managers are getting hit once again with these new waves of challenges. And so after about 2.5 years of this, they realized that some of these impacts of the global supply chains are systemic and permanent. And so with those challenges in place, they've got to do something different. So we know we've got data, we've got survey instruments that have told us that there's nearly $1 trillion that supply chain managers and sourcing managers are going to spend over the next couple years trying to reposition their supply chains, and that affects manufacturing. Mm-hmm. Manufacturers are being asked how diversified their sourcing is or their production is. And so manufacturers who have 100% of their production right now in China are being forced to diversify that sourcing. And one of the things that they're doing is reshoring it. And so reshoring is just bringing it back to the United States. And so, we've seen an incredible surge over the last 12 months in manufacturing construction spending put in place. Up nearly 35% year over year, and we'll show that data to you in a couple minutes. But this wave is going to continue. We keep hearing from CEO after CEO in the manufacturing sector to say that they've got a window of time in order to be able to change sourcing, bring it back to the U.S., make it greener, make it more efficient, make it more automated, use robotics to try and create some of the most advanced manufacturing processes, in the history of manufacturing, and that is creating a wave of construction. And a lot of them will see recession actually as an opportunity, because a broader recession, even if it's a soft landing, will drop commodity prices just a little bit, make labor a little more available. Hopefully for the construction sector and construction executives, you see that those materials are available and you can find labor to be able to conduct those projects. And so we're starting to hear hints of people who had put some of those projects on hold now starting to kind of jump back into the market. And they're like, hey, recession is my moment to really go and really dive in and really start to jump on the opportunity. So that's one. The other one is, yeah, go ahead. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the last couple of days, I've had a lot of interviews with different owners who are buying design and construction services, and a lot of people have been picking up on this story that you and I've literally been pushing for almost 3 years now. I mean, it's almost ridiculous. 3 years we've been talking about this. But as I was doing some research earlier in the week, I just keep seeing example after example of these U.S. based manufacturers that have been offshoring stuff. They're now bringing it back onshoring in a lot of different states. And I ran across one, to your point, 2 days ago. A company called Global Wafers. They're a semiconductor Taiwanese company who's literally looking at right now a $5 billion chip plant in Sherman, Texas. That would be somewhere around 3 million square feet. And so when you think about, you and I've been talking about U.S. based manufacturers bringing things back to the U.S. Now we're starting to see, not just from this example, but that being an example, these international owners who are looking at the U.S. as a place that's stable, business friendly, and a place where they can invest big dollars into manufacturing operations. I think it's really interesting to see that.
No, that's a fantastic point. And a lot of global manufacturers, you're exactly right, have got to figure out how to get production closer to consumption. So for a lot of those companies that are either Chinese based, Taiwanese based, or whether anywhere throughout Southeast Asia, they've got incredible expenses when it comes to transportation costs. And they've figured out that sometimes if you take total landed cost, which is the entire cost to be able to land a product on a shelf at a retailer or in an assembly line for a manufacturer, that if they take total landed cost calculations, that if they can get production closer to consumption, typically it's cheaper than even if they're sourcing it in a pretty inexpensive market. And so that's one of the reasons why this trend is going to continue. And you're right, that acceleration is starting to, it's accelerating, it's starting to pick up momentum as they start to move that production back to the US. So a couple other trends, and these are pretty obvious, and so I won't spend a lot of time on them, but warehousing is another one of those where we still have warehousing conditions right now in the US that are really tight. We need additional space, especially for e-commerce fulfillment. We know that the e-commerce wave has started flattening. So over the last couple years, e-commerce has just exploded. And so, when we look at e-commerce sales volumes today, they're 60% higher than they were in 2019 before the pandemic. And we don't see a lot of changes in that kind of spending. So those spending levels are maintaining that level. E-commerce right now, sales are growing somewhere around 6 to 7%. So in an industry that's maturing, 6 to 7% growth annually is a fantastic growth rate. And again, 60 to 70% higher than it was prior to the pandemic. So still just not enough space to be able to house products and get them staged for delivery so that they can, get those products that you want, Dwayne, same day or next day. So they've got to get more products staged a little bit closer to where you're going to be purchasing them. And so that looks like e-commerce warehouse fulfillment types of spaces. And so again, we know that there's some core components of those types of buildings and structures that have been in short supply. And we know that certain trusses, steel trusses that go on the tops of most of those warehouses are, back ordered for a year or more, and still continue to see extended delays. But as those products become more available, I think you'll see a lot of those projects take off. And I don't think that sector will feel recessionary pressure at all. A lot of markets, and you and I talked off camera about this, but a lot of markets also require, let me back up again. They're going to require companies to go in and look at their specific market to understand what those specific needs are. So like, let's take the next category, mixed use and even multifamily. If you're in a market that's losing population right now, you're probably not going to see those two categories blow through without feeling a recession. They're going to feel a recession. They really are. But if you're in an area like DFW, right, Dallas, Houston, Austin, anywhere up and down the southeast of the U.S., North Carolina, Georgia, even down into Florida, there's not enough housing, period. And the way the housing market is going, multifamily is going to be one of those sectors where you've got to get these large scale projects in place to be able to handle the influx of population. And that's going to blow through any risk of recession whatsoever. People have still got to be able to find those, places to live, but it's going to be market by market. So you look at the DFW area, you and I have been looking at population statistics for years, and we know that the DFW area alone is going to be able to accommodate anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million additional people, just citizens in those markets over the next 10 to 20 years. And that doesn't include any immigration coming over the border. So it's not quite a crisis for that market, but they've got to build all the infrastructure and places for people to live, education systems, healthcare systems, fire and emergency rescue. All of that has got to meet this expanding and exploding population, which is going horizontally and not necessarily vertically. So that's where the mixed use piece of that comes in. So that's what we're seeing as we see some of the suburban sprawl, is that it's quicker for a lot of developers to go in with a mixed use facility where we've got, a lot of multifamily housing on top, then you've got a mix of commercial and retail on the bottom. And so those two types of construction are probably going to blow through the recession. But again, we can't emphasize enough, it's market by market.
Correct.
So you've got to understand your local market to understand where that demand's going to be, because there are some markets that are going to feel a recession and they're going to go through it, and it's going to be pretty rough for them. The other categories we've got here, you're going to see, again, some differences market by market. Like education, for instance, there are some states that have absolute budget surpluses, and the electoral bodies are going to be basically pumping money into those education systems for expansion of facilities, to be expanding, the number of schools, the size of the schools, just to be able to handle some population increases. But there are others where we're already starting to get hints that they're going to be cutting budgets going into a recessionary period. We're already starting to see some states in some major metropolitan areas are having to cut the number of teachers, and they're just cutting back on spending. So that's interesting. Healthcare is kind of facing the same thing. And we've got kind of a looming, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there are a couple variants of COVID that could kind of slow down the way healthcare decides to spend in the next wave of expansion. They were dealing with COVID. It was a crisis for them. That's all they could deal with. They weren't thinking ahead. It was executive crisis management. What you and I talk about as a wartime leadership, right? They're in the middle of a war. All you can think about is survival. But then you come out of that and you move into a peacetime, and you become a peacetime executive, and you're thinking more longer term. And so a lot of healthcare systems are kind of in between that transition. And depending on what happens with these two variants, BA.4 and BA.5, which are kind of eluding, previous COVID history, they're, eluding vaccines, or eluding, some of the booster shots. And they're starting to show that maybe some of these are kind of starting to settle like down in the lungs instead of in some of the other respiratory system. And so it's causing some challenges in Europe. And so whether we get that wave in the US or not, could affect what happens with healthcare spending. But generally, the healthcare sector has 2 to 3 years of pent-up demand just sitting, waiting to release projects that they needed to get done. They want to get started. They've just got to be able to put COVID kind of in the rearview mirror so they can think forward and then go get those going. And then the last three, just real simple, but there's a lot of federal funds that will start flowing, especially for public spending, transportation, and civic projects. And then water and wastewater, especially anything west of the Rockies, is going to be really big, really in demand. And then the last thing is just power generation. We're feeling some blackout issues across the country. We know the electric grid is having challenges. So, we've got to make some changes there. Just real fast, going to blow over this, but if you take a look on residential and non-residential construction spending going into what has been almost a recessionary Q1. Okay, so let's think about it that way. And starting Q2, GDP growth has been very weak, but if you take a look, construction actually has done pretty well. So residential construction, In 2019, we were spending about $550 billion. Right now, we're on an annualized rate to hit about $900 billion through April, which is the last data we have. We'll get that updated soon. And then even on the non-residential side, $815 billion in spending, about $844 billion on an annualized basis in 2022. So really robust. And so the last slide we have for you is just an idea of where that spending is right now. And so couple columns here. If you take a look at the column with the green in it, it's basically April 2022 data. This is construction spending, and it's total dollars. So we can look and see how large a market is. And then on the far right, kind of highlighted in orange for you, the percent year-over-year change in construction spending by sector. So what we see there is like manufacturing, number one, 34% growth year over year, and it's a big market. You got almost $96 billion in spending going into the expansion of manufacturing capacity in the United States. So phenomenal growth. You can jump on down to like commercial spending, 102 billion in commercial spending, almost 18% higher year over year. And then I wanted to highlight just one goofy area when we think about office spending, right? Most you and I have talked to a lot of construction firms who aren't even pursuing office. But take a look. So the Castle Back to Work Barometer right now is showing that in the US, we've only got about 44% of the working population back in the office when we compare it to pre-pandemic levels. Only 44% back. So fascinating. And yet, if you look at office construction right now, trending at almost $85 billion a year in spending, annualized spending, and it's about 5% higher than it was a year ago. Even if we don't care about the percentage that much, because maybe last year was a bad year, so 5% on top of a bad year, maybe still not a great year, but we're still spending about $85 billion a year in expanding offices. So it's in, again, specific markets. You can see on the right there some of the Texas markets, 60% back in the office, and some micro areas like around Dallas and DFW, office capacity is very tight. It's starting to get tighter. And so especially even in the suburban sprawl areas, you're starting to see, single level or, small level office construction starting to take off. And so, again, it's market by market, and that's why we believe still that there are pockets here that are going to continue to blow through even a soft landing in a recession and still do very well. And then you can see some other sectors there that we've got. But that's kind of a quick rundown of some of those sectors that we see. Within manufacturing, there's all these little pockets like aerospace and automotive are going to blow right through it. Even with a recession, there's just so much they've got to catch up from over the last 2 years when they've been shut down that they're going to continue to blow through it. So all those tens of thousands of little suppliers that feed them products, like in the aerospace sector, coming to life after 3 years of being down. And so as they start to rebuild their capacity and they try to catch up with, aerospace demand, they've got to expand their facilities. So that looks like new construction projects. And as you said, perfect example too, if you listen to Boeing and others, they're making similar statements to say, well, we were sourcing a product in an overseas market, like in Russia. Yeah. We can't source that product in Russia today, so we have to find an alternative supplier. And some of them are saying, well, let's just go ahead and create that supply in the United States where it didn't exist before. We'll build that out. And they're putting a sense of urgency behind it. I can't wait 2 years. I can't wait till we go through a recession and come out of that recession to go do that project. I've got to have it now. Go get it underway.
Yeah.
So those are
Keith, I was sorry to interrupt you there. I can't tell you how much I appreciate our conversations. Quite frankly, I go out and you and I both are talking to a lot of clients, a lot of companies, a lot of executive teams on a daily basis. And man, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I'd get some insight from you and then I'd be able to speak on it and even do a little bit of my own predictability. But things are so volatile and change so quickly. I just appreciate you making me sound smart and me being able to reiterate what I'm hearing you say. But at the end of the day, this is really important, I think, for leaders to understand is right now, we can't afford for executives and managers in design and construction, engineering companies to waste energy on fear and concern about the economy. We would just strongly urge you to devote 100% of your energy and your emotions on supporting and developing your leaders to get out and have conversations with your prospects and your customers, not about projects, but about their business, about their industry, about what they're seeing, how that could affect them, and get into a business conversation with them about their industry, not a project level conversation. Because I think what they will hear and what we see all the time is they get insights and information that actually helps them realize that some of the information that they're getting from national news sources or associations or whatever just don't apply or just all out not true. And so, we want to make sure we're passing that message on to you. If there's anything we can do for you, even questioning your geographic areas or industry sectors within your local markets, we're certainly here to help you with that. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the 4th of July and remembering that we're in one hell of a great country that allows us to bring manufacturing and healthcare and all these other services to our communities, but it's only done through the hands of the architects, engineers, and contractors that we get to serve. So thank you for that. Thank you, Keith. Sure appreciate your help.
Absolutely. Always great to be here. Thanks.